This is the Roots and All podcast, and I'm your host, Sarah Wilson. Join me as I talk about all aspects of gardening with some of the top horticulturists from around the world. Hello and welcome to Roots and All, where my guest is qualified herbalist Meghan Rhodes. Meghan discusses how we can tap into our gardens for better health, why herbs are good for dealing with conditions that are manifestations of multiple problems, such as stomach issues, the 7 key tastes you find in herbs, and how you can get started on your own journey using herbs for well-being.
So I'm a qualified herbal medicine practitioner. That means I've done 4 years and 500 clinic hours and a final dissertation and all these various things to train in both knowing medicinal plants, knowing the human body, and knowing how to pair them together. But my background, I didn't grow up as a herbalist. I didn't grow up necessarily. I was out in the garden with my mum, who is, diligently each season planting her seasonal annuals from the DIY store, But yeah, I used to work in corporate tech for a decade. So I got into herbal medicine because I had my own health challenges, which I didn't actually realize were health challenges until I went off to uni and met some other people and went, wait, you mean this thing that my gut does every time I eat stuff isn't actually healthy? That's not what's always supposed to happen. So over a series of years of exploring different options and looking at different ways I could support my own health to get back into balance, I eventually stumbled upon herbal medicine, not even knowing it was called that. And as soon as I took a seasonal course to learn how to support my own body, and then, was hoping someday when I had a family to support them with natural remedies as well, everything lit up in me. It was like champagne going off inside me. And I was like, yeah, this is what I'm here for. This is what I signed up for. This is what I'm meant to be doing. So that kicked off the whole process of retraining and qualifying. And yeah, here we are now. So a bit of a journey.
Yeah, sounds like it. So I've got 2 questions really. And the first one is that I've just read a book, or I'm actually listening to a book, which is called When the Body Says No. And it's really struck me about the connection between what your mental health really and your physical health, and how lots of different things that have happened to you on an emotional level can actually maybe express themselves through the body. And as you were speaking as well, I thought part of me is still, I really think I'm open-minded and I'm really into nature and I love food and the power of food and everything. And even I sometimes think, yeah, but if I just use that herb, could it actually help me? So even I've got that tiny little grain of cynicism. And I think that if people come to herbalism as a remedy, do you think they're already more tuned into nature and therefore into that kind of mind-body connection? And that's what makes it successful, especially for them?
Oh, that's a really good question. Not necessarily that they're specifically tuned into nature. It's usually what often happens when I have private clients come through, they'll say, they're either they've tried everything else and they still don't feel okay. And usually they've been told by, various mainstream, allopathic practices, you're fine, go home, you're fine, go home. And they sat there going, I'm not fine. I know my body does not feel good, or they're having very, obvious quote unquote symptoms, that something is amiss. Or they say, I just don't feel right. I feel like there's something else I need to be doing. So it's either kind of a last ditch and they're, ready for anything, or they just want to get at things with a different angle. When I first came upon herbal medicine properly, I wasn't massively tuned into nature. I wasn't a massive nature nut. When I was growing up, I actually had mandatory outside playtime because I'd rather sit inside and read a book. To now being a herbalist, my father would say, "Who are you and what have you done with my daughter?" Yeah, I think having that awareness in yourself that something's not right, something's out. And that, I think, is that initial flip that switches somebody's intuition back on, especially if it's been off for a long time because they've taken a lot of, oh, you know, it hurts or it's uncomfortable or whatever. Take a paracetamol and be done with it. But when you switch that little flip that little switch back on inside yourself that says, I just need to listen to this. I need to figure out how I can actually respond to this specific message that my body's sending me. That's when you get that space. And that's when I think people look at herbal medicine. But yeah, I mean, to be quite frank, the plants are incredibly powerful. They've been around as the original medicine since the dawn of time. So whether somebody thinks they're going to work or not, you know, there are certain plants, like there are plants that are laxatives, right? Doesn't matter if you think it's going to work or not. If you take a lot of that, you will have a laxative effect because your body knows what to do with it. You know, we are nature, plants are nature. We've been having this exchange, this dialogue, this relationship since, you know, again, the dawn of time. So even if you don't intellectually, quote unquote, know what to do with a herb, you don't know the physiological process and impact it has on you, when you take it, when you ingest it, it will still have that effect on you. Because your body knows, I know this conversation, and it kicks off all these biological processes. So it'll still work. Now, having them paired effectively, that's where the skill comes in. You know, because you can Google a lot of stuff like, natural remedies for whatever. And you come up with, 10 herbs for, I don't know, cold and flu, right? And then people look at this as, well, I tried that didn't do anything. I took those echinacea capsules, it didn't do anything, or whatever, right? It's because you've got to know when and how to pair which herb with which person, with what's going on for them, and looking at the root cause. So yeah, there's a lot of art that interweaves with the science, shall we say.
Yeah, and I'm going to actually also pick on something else that you said, and that was about the gut problems. And I say this because for some reason, it seems to be that so many people I speak to at the moment are having issues and they're being investigated for everything from as serious as cancer down to kind of colitis, Crohn's, IBD. And it just seems to be around me everywhere at the moment. And people are dealing with bloating and they're having colonoscopies and they're not getting any answers. And it just seems to be so prevalent and also so unresolvable. And that's interesting what you said about traditional medicine or allopathic medicine. And sometimes, again, there's probably that element where people are looking for answers and actually not finding them. And also maybe speaking within their community and finding out that lots of people are in that same boat. So specifically talking about the gut problems, how did you find it so effective and so different to what you were being offered otherwise?
So I guess as a bit of personal background, I grew up thinking it was normal that you would have a meal and you would take some, you can tell by my accent, I'm not originally from Yorkshire where I live now. I'm from over in the States. I'd have a meal. I'd have 1 to 2 tablespoons of Pepto-Bismol, which we now know contributes to Rye's disease. And then I would go wait for something to happen for a very long time. And I would always be bloated. I would always have gut pain. I would have griping really frequently. I often wore clothes that were either stretchy or flowy or a larger size than I needed because I had to have room for that give because I was always uncomfortable. So jeans, forget about it, right? That's not how you should feel all the time. So to get to the root of that was a really long journey. And it wasn't just about uncovering herbal medicine. I think to pick up on the point you mentioned, so many people are experiencing gut imbalance nowadays. And there are 2 really key root factors to that. One is when stress flows, digestion doesn't. And that's because it kicks off a whole hormonal process in the body of stress hormones, shutting down bodily processes. If you think about, an animal in the Sahara, I don't know, an antelope or whatever, and they're in the middle of eating, they're doing something, and then a lioness comes upon them, right? All other processes in the body shut down and they take off. So when there's acute stress, your digestive process goes, oh, right, this is not the most important thing to be expending my energy on, because it is very energy intensive, and it diverts it towards fight, flight, freeze, fawn. We, however, in this day and age, live under so much stress, constant stress, and we're constantly bombarded with messages, marketing, imagery, sound, everything that is just constantly stressful, whether it's designed to stress us out or whether it's inherently stressful. So our bodies are constantly under stress, and your gut is trying to deal with that all day, every day, for a lot of people. The other side of the coin is that a lot of the food that exists these days is what, I don't know if you've ever read the book In Defense of Food by Michael Pollan, but it is fantastic. It's one of our sort of seminal family books, and I highly recommend it. He has coined the term in that book, edible food-like substances. And that is frankly the majority of what's in the grocery store. So, you've got your actual fruit, your actual veg, your actual, meat, for example. You've got unprocessed grains. Everything else in the shop, if it's got a label with a list of ingredients on it, that is an edible food-like substance. If it's not the raw ingredients that you can then make at home, or if somebody's, actually made that thing themselves with those raw ingredients, it's an edible food-like substance. And like I mentioned before, we are nature. Our bodies have developed over millennia to engage with the other parts of nature, which, in a less sort of fanciful turn of phrase, our bodies have developed to eat and process actual food. But so much of what is sold to us as food these days is not food. It's chemicals. It's highly processed, let alone the stuff that's sprayed on it, what have you, which is a big part of why, our family, we grow as much of our own food as possible. But obviously not everybody has the time or desire or resource to do that. That then goes into your gut, and your gut goes, what the heck is this? What am I supposed to do with this? Let alone that a lot of the substances are quite inflammatory and damaging to the digestive tract. So that combination of what is for many of us, years of eating edible food-like substances and years of being under constant stress at levels that we're not meant to be constantly under, is a perfect storm for all kinds of gut issues. And you can take all kinds of things to make the discomfort stop, but it will keep coming back if you've not gotten to the root cause, and if you've not addressed that root, addressed the factors at play, and healed, the physical gut, as well as the processing of nutrients in the body, as well as whatever external factors are at play as well. And this is one of the things that herbal medicine really takes into account, is we're not just looking at, oh, right, so you're bloated, we'll make the bloating stop. Well, why are you bloated to begin with? It's, that term that gets bandied about, holistic, but you genuinely, you can't just swap the herbs for a pill. There are plenty of herbs that you can use for pain relief, for example, that you could quote unquote swap for a painkiller, but that's not going to stop your body sending that message. I often say, just because the television's on mute and you can't hear it doesn't mean the show still isn't playing. So you could put the TV on mute and you could walk out the room, and you could come back in, an hour later after you've had a conversation with somebody else and got distracted and, then started making a snack and done whatever you're going to do. You come back into the room, suddenly you're looking at a television screen where when you left, I don't know, there were two people falling in love and everything was great. And now they're like on a desert island somewhere at each other's throats. And you're like, how did this happen? How did we get here? You've got no idea. Because the TV's been on mute. We haven't been listening to our bodies. We've been silencing them, but the show keeps playing. And that's what we really look to remedy in herbal medicine, getting connected again to the messages our bodies send us so that we can respond to them and support them and feel better. Not just feel better, but feel great.
So you're talking about herbs, and as gardeners, obviously there's this link between gardening and, as you said in an email to me, I'm kind of paraphrasing you, but it adds another layer to your garden in terms of well-being if you can think about the food that you're growing. So herbs, does that encompass fruit and veg, or are you just talking purely about things that people might traditionally consider to be herbs, such as, I don't know, mint, parsley, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so things you would traditionally consider as herbs, but also garlic is used within herbal medicine. I was just teaching, I teach a year-long course on sort of an intensive course in herbal medicine. And just before we started our conversation, we were having our bi-weekly chats. And we had this whole discussion about where is the line between herbs and food, because often that line is really gray and blurry. But yeah, we use garlic medicinally. There are some, raspberry leaf we use medicinally. So that's the leaf of the plant which fruits. Rose hips, which is a fruiting body. Hawthorn berries, which are a fruiting body. So not, it's not your traditional, it's not an apple, shall we say. But all different aspects of the garden. Yeah, there are many more things probably in your garden that are medicinal than you realize. But of course, we all know that the well-being benefits now of being in the garden, the active gardening, and how great that is for us. We get the fresh air, we're moving our bodies, we're connecting with the earth, you've got your hands in the soil, all of that amazing microbiome that lives in the soil then, mixes with your skin microbiome and gives you all kinds of benefits as well. But then when you think about what you're growing, even if it's just your mini herb patch where you've got your peppermint, your rosemary bush, and your sage and your oregano, and maybe you've got a lavender bush somewhere, a bit of chamomile, gardening, growing those, even just the strictly traditional herbs, yeah, it's a whole other dimension of well-being through your garden, because you're growing medicine. You're growing things that you can use to support your body, to stay in balance, to get back into balance, to digest your food, to heal your skin, to calm your nervous system, all sorts of things. So yeah, there's a lot of medicine to be had in the garden.
I did actually listen to you on another podcast, and you were talking about the 7 key tastes of herbs, which I thought was really interesting. I wondered if you could maybe touch on that.
Sure, yeah. So there are 7 different tastes that we work with within herbal medicine, and they all set off a cascade of events within our bodies that we don't necessarily have to be consciously aware of in order for them to kick off, which is another great benefit. So they are the bitter taste, the astringent taste, the salty taste, aromatic or pungent, depends on who you talk to, mucilaginous, which is fun to say, sour, and sweet. And it's a great way to start learning the medicinal benefits of herbs without thinking, right, I've got to go get some massive book that's got, profiles of 500 different medicinal herbs, and I've got to learn all this terminology and memorize all this stuff and I always like to say, keep it simple. Keep it simple and keep it practical. Start with one herb at a time and go through the portal of taste, because not only will you feel what it does in your body, But, we remember taste. We use our senses. It's easier to remember things. So then you can start thinking, oh, well, for example, your aromatic or your pungent herbs. These are usually the culinary herbs and spices. So the rosemary, the thyme, the oregano, the sage, what have you. When you get that aromatic taste, what is it doing in the body? That primarily comes from the volatile oils in the plant, which is what gets distilled and skimmed off and turned into bottled up as essential oils. And they are, broadly speaking, highly antimicrobial. So all the antis, as I like to say, antibacterial, antiviral, antifungal, antimicrobial, which means, traditionally we use these herbs and spices on our Sunday roast, for example. You've got, your roast chicken, for example, you've got your roast potatoes, and you've got all these herbs and spices on them and stuffed into them, right? Why? Well, number one, yes, it tastes good. But number two, think about before the days of, refrigeration, when that may have been the meal you had, that was the food that was available to you, you had a family to feed, and you were going to eat it because otherwise you didn't have anything else to eat. And it might have been slightly on the turn, or you might not have realized it was slightly on the turn. So these culinary herbs and spices having these antimicrobial properties meant that you were able to mitigate the, if there was anything brewing on the meat. They're also very warming. So warming up I like to call it the digestive fire. So imagine if you've got a campfire going that you want to cook your food on, right? You've got to light that fire in order to cook the food. Otherwise, it's just going to sit there and not cook. And everybody's going to be cold and hungry and grouchy, right? And nobody wants a cold, hungry, grouchy camper. We want happy campers, yeah? So lighting that digestive fire, that taste starts in the mouth and it travels down the digestive system. You'll start to salivate because the body is going, oh, right, food is coming. Time to get the digestion warmed up. We're getting ready to process food. The liver starts going with its bile. Okay, nutrients incoming. I know I've got that coming me. I've got to siphon off the nutrients and I've got to siphon off the waste products and process that through the body. So all of these things start happening. And all you've done is put some rosemary on your tea.
And again, it's kind of how it taps into your baser instincts, I suppose, for want of a better term, but it's how you get triggered by certain things. And on the kind of flip side of that, I suppose, have you had any examples where you've found that people have been almost instinctively drawn to a plant or a herb that would then benefit them? Are there any real life examples?
Yeah, I mean, I see this all the time when I teach. We go in through the gateway of taste, and usually I make the tea and everybody drinks it. And I don't tell them anything about it. Sometimes I don't even tell them what plant it is. And I say, taste it, feel where it goes in the body, feel what it's doing in the body. What do you think this herb does? What do you think it's quote unquote good for? And they'll sit there and say, oh, I feel my stomach starting to rumble, or I feel my chest clearing, or what have you. I think it does this, I think it does that. And then we'll explain, I'll go through this sort of formal list of what it does. And everybody goes, I don't know how, but I knew that. That makes sense. And that's when, I couldn't pick one story, because that's when all the stories come out. Somebody will say, there was this one time when I just really wanted oregano on everything. And I just didn't know why. And I had it for ages. And then one day it stopped. Why is that? They'll say. And I'll say, well, it's because your body was sending you a message that it had a need for what that plant could give you. And you listened to it, which is brilliant. You met that need. And then your body said, I'm good. I don't need this anymore. And then you stopped. But we tend to think of it as like, oh yeah, I really fancy this herbal tea that I've got in my cupboard for now. No, yeah, I liked it for a while. No, now I'm a bit bored of it. I probably just overdid it, or I got bored. but it might just be that your body's gone, the need's been met, and now we can move on.
I guess that is a recommendation, really, to have a garden that has a fair few of these types of plants in there, so that if you did have a need arise, you might have what you wanted to hand.
Exactly. I've had so many times where, we've had a little cold in the family or something like that. And the herbs that, it's a time of year where everything's nice and robust. And I'll just head out back with my, I often use a cafetiere if I'm using fresh herbs, because then you get to infuse it and then you press it. So you squeeze all the goodness out. And then obviously you don't end up with a bunch of loose plant matter in your mug. And so I'll wander out and I'll grab, a bundle of elderflowers, and I'll grab a handful of plantain, and I'll get a bit of yarrow, and I'll put some peppermint in, and then I'll go, what else do we need? Okay, there's a bit of a virus going around as well in the family, so let's get some sage in, because that's one of my aromatic herbs in my garden for the antimicrobial properties. And we'll put a pinch of Melissa in just to lift the taste of it a bit, which is also antiviral. So you can literally just do the classic gardening person thing, right? You've got your robe on and your wellies, and you're wandering around with either a basket or, in my case, a cafetiere, going, right, what can I just shove in here? And then I'll go back in and make some tea. It's lovely to be able to walk outside into your garden, into your medicine cabinet, as opposed to just staring at a bunch of bottles with warning labels on them.
Yeah, there's so much to be said for that. Do you have any resources that you'd like to share with people before you go?
Yes, absolutely. So as I've mentioned, I teach workshops and courses across the seasons in Yorkshire. But if you're interested in going on a deep journey into herbalism, then I do have my intensive course I mentioned. It's called Awaken Herbal Wisdom. And that has an enrollment period that opens every September to people on the waiting list, and then open enrollment is in October. So I do have an enrollment period open now for the 2024 cohorts. And it's for anybody who really wants to get herbalism into their bones and feel confident working with it in their daily lives. So I've got students who are totally new but really keen. I've got others who are on qualification courses and want to supplement with some more experiential learning. So I'll definitely share the link for the show notes, or you can DM me the word access on Instagram at Rhodes Roots Remedies, and I'll send that along to you. Or if you're not anywhere nearby, or if you just want a bit of a taster, pun completely intended, then you can head to the link in the show notes I'll share access to the recording of the first live lesson on taste from that course, and the coursebook pages to go with it. So that'll take you through one of the most commonly occurring tastes in herbal medicine. So in just an hour of watching this, you'll be able to understand how the messages in your body that the body's sending you are asking you for support with this particular taste, so you can further develop that skill of listening and responding to your body's needs, and then start to have it play with some of those culinary/medicinal herbs, obviously only ones that you are confident that you've identified and are safe to ingest, it must be said. But yeah, this skill set is really like that master key to unlocking herbalism. So really, really happy to share those resources.
Many thanks to Meghan, and thank you to you as well for listening. This week's shout out to good people doing good work goes to Green Blue Urban, who specialise in supplying products that connect people and nature in the urban environment. They always produce innovative and well-built products, and they are also very lovely to deal with, so thumbs up to them, and of course, there's a link to the website in the show notes. Dr. Ian Bedford is here now with a valuable lesson about nature.
One August morning, back in 2012, I looked out of my window and I saw something very strange. My dew-laden lawn appeared to be covered in hundreds of small sticks. So I went outside to investigate, and to my surprise realised that they weren't sticks, but they were huge brown slugs, some up to 6 inches long. I then discovered that they weren't just on my lawn, but they were also all over the vegetable plot and in the greenhouse, devouring everything, including native snails and even a dead mouse. So where had they come from? And what was going on? Grabbing a large bucket and a trowel, I started to scoop them up, and within 30 minutes, I'd collected over 350. There was clearly something very odd about these slugs, and their infestation was something that I'd never experienced before. So with the help of colleagues in my lab, we decided to investigate them in more detail, and we soon identified them as the Spanish slug, an invasive species that over recent years had been steadily moving northwards from the Mediterranean basin. And here it was, now in the UK, and in my garden. So as word spread through the media, many people got in contact to report Spanish slug infestations that they'd also found within their own gardens, all across East Anglia and heading south and west, providing us with evidence that the invader was spreading across Britain. But why was this slug such a concern to us? Well, unlike our large native slugs that eat decaying vegetation, the Spanish slug was a serious plant pest across mainland Europe, and controlling it had proved very difficult. Having evolved within a hot, arid environment, the Spanish slug had survival traits that actually gave it a huge advantage over the native slugs that existed within cooler and wetter environments. It laid twice as many eggs, matured quicker, and produced vast quantities of thick, sticky slime that not only protected it from sunlight and being eaten by predators, but also allowed it to move over dry, rough surfaces with ease. This meant that all of the commonly used slug barriers we tested, such as grit, eggshells, and even copper tape, failed to deter Spanish slugs. And nematodes too showed no effect in controlling this slimy surface-dwelling mollusk. The only non-chemical option left for home gardeners to use appeared to be hand collection, or rather large beer traps. But extremely worrying for the many commercial growers who relied on slug pellets to protect their crops, we also found that a single mature Spanish slug would eat up to 20 pellets before it was affected. So with their potential to wreak havoc across Britain, and no effective control measures, we could only watch and continue to monitor their appearance and spread over the following years. 4 years then passed before it became clear that the expected decimation of our gardens and crops was not actually happening, and that new reports of Spanish slug infestations were becoming far less frequent. And this trend has continued through to the present day, with no apparent explanation other than perhaps it being the effect of our inconsistent weather conditions. However, I think the reason is a lot more simple, in that it's a completely natural process that has occurred time after time when an invasive species spreads to a new location. For a short while, just like a new disease, the invader runs riot within its new home, where it is alien to the local ecology. But then, over time, the resident native species, the predators and the parasites, begin finding ways to deal with the invader, using it as a new food source, and eventually suppressing its rampant behaviour. And with the Spanish slugs, I've been able to see this in action within my own garden, where they're still present, but no longer a problem, thanks in part to the blackbirds that previously avoided these slimy creatures, but have now learnt to wipe them on the grass to remove the slime before eating them.
You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website rootsandall.co.uk. Please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support the podcast. Because if you enjoy the show, please help it continue. I also have a GoFundMe where you can make a one-off donation. Even a one-off donation of £1 helps, and I'll be really grateful for your support. So please go to Patreon or GoFundMe and search for Roots and All podcast.